Charles Onana has written a book which is very interesting. And the title is called "Is Africa Changing When Africa Changes?"
The real reasons of the divorce, die echte Gründe des Trennung.
The real reason of separation.
Herr Onana,
Mr. Onana is from Cameroon, but also France. I call you to the podium.
Can you come to the microphone?
Please come to the microphone. Thank you.
Maybe you say yourself the title of your presentation, because I don't have it on the program.
Bonjour à tous et merci.
Hello to all, and I want to warmly thank the Schiller Institute to have invited me, and mainly my friend Jacques, which insisted a lot to make that I can participate to this gathering, which I find very excellent. Since yesterday, we have been able to hear a lot of interventions of a high level, of a very high level, with intervention speeches which show us the physiognomy, the shape of the international policy today, but also its speeches which show how our mission is so big to go to a world, a multipolar world, a respect world where all human beings have to be equals on Earth. So I have the task, difficult task after the meal, to not contribute to encourage you to sleep after eating. So I will try to make you awake, not for me, but for our colleagues, which will come after me. So I will speak to you about false ideas which have been spread in Western countries.
Ces fausses idées avaient un objectif très clair. C'est que les populations occidentales n'aient pas accès à ce qui se passe derrière le rideau. Derrière le rideau, c'est-à-dire sur ce qui se passe réellement en Afrique et pourquoi ça se passe de cette façon-là. Alors, une des fausses idées que vous avez certainement entendues,
one of the fake ideas you certainly heard is that Africa was a poor and miserable continent. Since it is miserable and therefore we need generous souls to come and help Africa. So these generous souls are the Western countries in a global way. These Western countries, they will mobilize funds to go into the Sahel, for example, to intervene on famine, to go at that spot to save the children which are in difficulties, and so on and so on. And then the European Union, which has signed agreements in the 40s, before the independence of African countries, in the framework of the European Economic Union, with the same message: we have to help Africa to develop itself. At no point we have given the impression that Africa could be a partner which somebody by which we could simply exchange. I just to get rid of these wrong ideas, I want to give you some background information which are from Western sources, so which allow you to understand why things were hidden behind the curtain, the reality of Africa. I will start with France, which is a French-speaking country, an important element. The entire geopolitics, be it yesterday on the colonial or today, or the relations with China and Russia in Africa, is all based on the same problematics. The first document which I call your attention to, which was established in 1896 by a French divisionary general called Charles Philibert. In that document, Philibert says the following, I quote, "The British," it means Great Britain, "the British, by all possible means, wants to become master of entirety of Africa. In his insatiable avidity, he will that the entire continent is under his control, and that all the products serve to increase its wealth. The only means to be an obstacle to the British for the French is to take the position of the Chetlac. So then the Western Africa will be completely French, around which all the resources of Congo, Bornu, Senegal, Algeria, and Tunisia will be grouped around us, and we will use this advantage position, and we will be in a position to be an obstacle to the British invaders, and they will have to concentrate in Eastern Africa, where they will be in front of Germany and the Russians. The document is from 1896. So, another interesting document has been done by American in 1970. C'est un ouvrage qui a été écrit par Seymour Whittaker. That's a document of Seymour Whittaker called United States and Africa, Interests and Challenges. When you discuss with American or diplomats from the US or researchers, they said there's no American interest in Africa because their argument is always the same, very simple. It's the volume between the United States and the African continent. They say, for example, the volume of trade is 1.03%. Insignificant. When you put this figure under your nose, you cannot really argue, contradict. So what do they say in this book I quoted? I quote, it appears clear that Africa, in particular South Africa, is a main important provider of certain minerals, with the United States in most part have the obligation to import. The other significant fact, for 6 of these minerals, notably gold, platinum, manganese, antimony, vanadium, and chromium, plus the 2/3 of the world's resources are concentrated in the countries of Southern Africa. So you will see that this creates immediate rivalries among Western powers, notably between France and the United States, and Germany to a certain extent. But the most important, it will be China and the Soviet Union, today's Russia. For the Americans, it was especially dangerous that the Chinese and the Russians would penetrate the African continent because these resources. To confront this worry,
de trouver les moyens,
they will find the means through a series of agreements, more or less tricky, bilateral agreement and multilateral, through the IMF and the World Bank. They will face this issue. I will give you another interesting quote, which helps you to understand the worries of the Americans in front of China. This is a secret report of experts of NATO, and in 1965, written in 1965. The experts of NATO say China has 4 objectives in Africa: to present itself as a major power, to become the leader of the third world, to reduce and to eliminate Western influence and prevent the West to access to the resources, and convert in the long term, convert the Africans to Chinese ideology, communist ideology. NATO says here that it's the danger of losing these resources and the danger of seeing the communist ideology extended into Africa. In that situation, the United States are, even if this is a report of NATO, but the US are in the same kind of worry.
La Chine commence
and when China starts after the independencies from between 60s and 70s, when China is getting closer to Africa, when there was a famine hitting the Sahel, the US, it was a very major famine. The US was asking themselves if they had intervened in the framework, in the context of this famine. In that, then Mr. Henry Kissinger wrote a report which he has given to President Nixon in July 73. In that report, Kissinger said the following to Nixon: in the United States, we don't measure the importance in terms of natural resources of the importance for America, the importance of the natural resources of Africa. Africa has considerable amounts of phosphates, copper, cobalt, and other minerals. The reserves of iron ore are the double of the US and represent 2/3 of the Soviet Union. End quote. It is at that point that President Nixon will decide that the US would intervene in the Sahel to help out to save the countries hit by the famine. In the US opinion, in Western opinion, this aspect of the American intervention has never been exposed, discussed. I say this because this allows us to understand everything has been done to hide reality of the resources of Africa, but also to hide the information about the Western interventions. This is not only in the 60s and 70s. During the Second World War, for example, very few people in this room know about it, but the uranium, which was used for the Manhattan program, to make the atom bomb, which was thrown on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This uranium came from Katanga, from the Belgian Congo. It was the Belgian government in exile in London, which negotiated with the United States to give them the uranium from the Belgian Congo. At that point, the major point was that Albert Einstein had written to President Roosevelt that we should pay attention, that if ever the Germans would get their hand on the uranium of the Congo, then the Third Reich would rapidly be able to produce a nuclear weapon and would get very, very complicated for the Allies. The American intelligence services knew about this. They knew that here in Germany, the chemists and the physicians were working to develop the atomic weapon. So, very rapidly, to go fast to make it clear, when the US, after 9/11, they were looking for oil resources to kickstart, to boost their economy. President George Bush will decide the creation of a united command, which was based in Stuttgart, which is known as the AFRICOM. This was the weapon, the armed arm of the United States in operational matters to coordinate the interventions of the US in Africa. That has been done. You now understand through all these examples and very precise information that Africa today is at the center of world rivalries and the survival of the Western countries, but also for Russia and for China. Lastly, we have seen France leaving the Sahel countries, Burkina Faso, Niger, and in Mali. The main argument has been to say we were fighting against terrorism in the Sahel, and unfortunately, these countries, which was the argument given by President Macron, there's no recognition for the French engagement against terrorism. Once you know what's really going on, and if you're not based on ideology but on facts, we have to acknowledge that in part of the energy of the French nuclear power was guaranteed in great part by the uranium coming from Niger, by agreements signed in the 60s, by Gabon, and by the Central African Republic. These countries, which have lots of minerals, including uranium, they are the guarantee, the independence, the energetic independence of France. This is really not really said neither to the French, neither to the Africans. This was always done under the cover of helping Africans which have nothing. Now, recently, we discover that these countries of the Sahel have shifted alliances. Burkina, Niger, and Mali, they have had a rapprochement with Russia and China. So the European Union has decided to break its diplomatic relations with these countries because there have been coup d'etat in these countries, and that we needed a return to the constitutional order. That's for the press, for the appearances. In reality, the EU found out that the African leaders were waking up after a long sleep, and now they want to use for their own development. One can criticize their attitude, but we cannot blame these countries that they want to shift their alliances, because they realized that these alliances with the Western countries were only leading to economic disasters in their own countries. Now, Africa will become very populated. There's a major dynamic in demography and the young countries, and the leaders are thinking about all these issues. To conclude my intervention, I want to show another major element in all these speeches, which are presenting the development aid and human rights. And since the fall of the Berlin Wall, human rights in France made this a major issue of human rights. After having supported for dozens of years, they have supported autocratic regimes, but there is this shift. After the fall of the Berlin Wall, many Europeans they dropped their operations in Africa. They thought they would make much more money in Eastern Europe, and then they found out that there were a lot of problems. There were advantages, but a lot of disadvantages. But Africa remained a possible El Dorado. So I want to conclude when I say that Africa will be the key issue of the economic life for the Western countries, even including on the defense matters, because the resources are there and not somewhere else. I want to give two other examples to personally, I'm very happy of the crisis situation of the current world. The Burkina, I think this is, we should not get depressed. I think there is a real occasion to do something new, to do something different. People start thinking, to change their ways of thinking their own future. There's a boulevard in front of them to invent solutions, to find ideas, to innovate, and to bring a dynamic which wasn't there for a long time. The monopoly of international policies by the Western vision under American tutorship this has destroyed the creativity in international relations because we had to think in one direction. Today, one can realize that this vision was not operational. We have heard the Italian friend calling for the reform of the UN. The Africans are demanding this since a very long time. We cannot continue like this. We're having the same parameters, the same procedures as 80 years ago. So on that level, this book, which was written in 1975, which was a little bit visionary by the Monsieur Makambo, the former Secretary General of UNESCO, which what I was exchanged. He said in his book, the new dossier, Africa dossier, he wrote especially more than 60% of the world gold production comes from Africa, and the majority outside South Africa comes from Western Africa. In terms of most of the diamonds come from Africa, outside of Zaire, Congo, the rest comes also from Western Africa. If South Africa had its liberation through Mandela, it was because of fight against apartheid, because of the mining companies, which realized that if there was not somebody serious and stable in heading South Africa, they would lose a lot. To close the parenthesis, 40% of manganese comes also from Western Africa. And in the same time, there was a declaration, Mr. Secretary of State Crocker of the US at that point, he said
oui, les pays situés au sud du Sahara sont une source de nombreux minerais d'une importance vitale pour notre développement et notre défense.
Sub-Saharan Africa are essential for our defense. They give us most of the raw materials we need, and they satisfy nearly the entirety of our needs in chrome and for defense in manganese and in cobalt for reaction motors and other equipment and industrial diamonds and so on and so on. Thank you for your attention.
Dankeschön, Herr Onana. Es war sehr
Thank you, Mr. Onana. That was very interesting that you have the original sources proving the geopolitical attitude of the West toward Africa from the point of view what Helga said yesterday, that there are limited resources and the limits to growth. So now we come to Mrs. Purnima Anand from India. She is the founder and president of BRICS Forum India. And she has the video. She can unfortunately not participate in this conference right now.
I am Purnima Anand, President BRICS International Forum from India. Excellencies, distinguished representative of state and civil institutions, esteemed members of the international press, Madam Helga, and colleagues of Schiller Institute. I congratulate you all to be gathered in Berlin, a city that understands deeply how the geography of power can shift, shatter, and ultimately rebuild at a unique juncture in human history. For roughly 5 centuries, global system, our primary trade routes, our foundational finances architecture, and our international legal frameworks were largely drawn from single-point Western-centric perspectives. Today, we must have the intellectual honesty and the strategic clarity to recognize that we are not witnessing the chaotic decline of any single region or nation. Rather, we are experiencing the natural historic culmination of a 500-year cycle. We are stepping firmly, irrevocably into a truly global, multipolar era. Our collective challenge today and the core responsibility of the institutions represented in this room is to ensure that this profound transition result in collaborative stability rather than fragmented approach as a constructive opportunity for mutual growth rather than a hostile zero-sum confrontation. To understand why this 500-year cycle is culminating today, we must have the courage to examine exactly how it began and systematically how it dissolved. Global colonialism did not materialize out of a vacuum. It evolved through distinct historical drivers, technology shifts, and corporate extractive framework. It began in 1453 with a profound geopolitical catalyst, the fall of Constantinople when the Ottoman Empire closed legacy Silk Road land routes. Western Europe faced an existential supply chain crisis. This forced European kingdoms to look outward to open oceans to secure direct access to Asian market. Portugal and Spain were the first nation to launch long-distance maritime expeditions driven by 3 core motives often summarized as gold, glory, and God. Driven by economic wealth, political prestige, and ideological expansion. Early pioneers built an international system shaped by territorial conquest and state-chartered joint stock companies. The formal end of 500 years of European global dominance reached its historical climax in the mid to late 20th century through a massive wave of decolonization. This era, which began in 1492 with European expansion into the Americas, saw its traditional physical empires collapse following World War II. The structural foundation of that era did not break all at once. This undoing of this era occurred in distinct, monumental historical stages, with first wave 1776 to 1820s, when the geopolitical architecture fractured, when the Americas broke away from British, Spanish, and Portuguese colonial rule. Then the post-war inversion, where World War II effectively bankrupted the legacy of European power, triggering an irresistible wave of mass decolonization across Asia, Africa, and then final stage with African turning point, when the sudden collapse of the Portuguese Empire formally ended the oldest, most continuous European territorial presence on the African continent. The last symbolic finale ended with the historic handovers of Hong Kong and Macau, quietly brought down the final curtain on formal European territorial administration in Asia. Today, we must recognize that the traditional structure foundation of that 500 years imperial canvas have permanently, entirely dissolved. The formal handovers at the close of the 20th century were merely the final chapter of territorial administrations. The current phase we are living through today is the democratization of global governance itself. Let us be pragmatic. Today's international system urgently demand a structural architecture that reflect current demographic and economic realities, not the frozen post-war compromises in 1942. When we look at the defining existential challenges of our generation, from the complex realities of the climate transition and the ethical border of artificial intelligence governance, to the deep security global supply chain, no single capital, no single continent holds all the answers. The global south is no longer a passive arena for external policies or well-intended development aid. It has transformed into an active, indispensable laboratory for global solution. This transformation is driven by immense demographic vitality, rapidly expanding technological hubs, and unshakable desire for self-determination. Depending on the specific focus of this conference, the core section are three frameworks: the institutional reform angle, the economic autonomy angle, the pragmatic multi-alignment angle. Addressing systematic anxieties of my misconceptions, as experts and policymakers, we must recognize that modern sovereignty is ultimately defined by agency and choice. The emergence of new economic framework and coalition, such as the expanded BRICS network, modernized regional trade blocs, and independent financial clearing mechanism, should not be viewed by Europe as a threat to the international order. Instead, they should be understood as stabilizing pillars with a more diversified, resilient, and balanced global architecture. Sovereign nations today practice strategic multi-alignment. They choose partnership based on mutual respect, domestic development goals, and shared pragmatic interests, rather than old, rigid ideological blocks. There are those within traditional institutions who worry that a multipolar world brings inherent stability. Some argue that the alternative to a unipolar system is a chaotic power vacuum or a dangerous new hegemony. To that anxiety, I say clearly, the alternative decentralized network of regional anchors working collectively to maintain balance. Similarly, a frequent narrative in international media argues that emerging powers are simply trapping smaller nations in new, sophisticated forms of economic dependency and debt. But I contend before this audience that every sovereign nation possesses the absolute right to negotiate its own development terms. This solution to these challenges is not for traditional powers to paternalistically restrict their choices or lecture them on dependency. The solution is to provide genuinely competitive, fair, and transparent alternatives on the global stage. Finally, let us entirely clear to those who look at this historic shift and label it as dangerous revisionism. This is not revisionism, It is institutional evolution. We do not seek to tear down the international order. We seek to strengthen it, to legitimize it, and to preserve it by making it genuinely representative of the world as it exists today, thereby ensuring its long-term survival. Let us use the candor that diplomatic spaces require. The principal risk before us today is not a lack of resources or lack of intellect. It is a profound deficit of trust. To bridge this structural gap of trust, our multilateral institution must adapt with far greater speed. We must consciously transition away from the lingering dynamic of patron and client and move towards an era of genuine peer-to-peer partnership. For the resource-rich nation of the world, true sovereignty means absolute economic autonomy. It means moving up the value chain from legacy raw extraction to localized production, industrial value addition, shared technologies, integration partnership with industrialized economies like Germany must look like co-investment and technology transfer, not just trade agreements for raw material. This is how we build a global economy that can withstand systematic shocks. Distinguished colleagues, members of the media, let us use the focus of this conference not to endlessly litigate the grievances of the past 500 years, but to actively, cleanly co-author the architecture of the next 50 years. Let us work together to build an international order that is robust precisely because it is fair and enduring precisely because it represents the collective democratic will of the entire global community. I wish peace, love, and care in the world, and we should take care of our beautiful earth. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Frau Anand. Kann man mich hören? Ja? Okay.
From India, we fly to South Africa. We sail there per ship because from the tip of India, it's just straight ahead a while and then you land in South Africa. And we have from South Africa Mr. Abbey Makoe. He's a journalist and he's the founder of Global South Media Network. He also has sent us a video. Please play the video now.
Is taking place amid the rapid decline in international cooperation. Powerful men are exerting free will on the rest of their geopolitical opponents.
Wait a second.
Hide behind silence. Global institutions have become a farce. This week alone, World Soccer Governing Body FIFA said nothing as the US government barred the Iranian national soccer team from staying on the US soil during the 2026 World Cup. Genocidal Israel still participates in the Eurovision. Therefore, whereas I fully concur with the Schiller Institute's appreciation for the urgent necessity of a global security and development architecture, I'd like to differ on the notion that the world has arrived at the end of 500 years of colonialism. Professor Fadel Kaboub, renowned Tunisian American political economist, recently gave a blunt appraisal of the stranglehold that the lingering traits of neocolonialism continue to hold in Africa. Of greater significance to his empirical evidence about the oftentimes subtle subjugation of the continent by Western powers, Professor Kaboub, who is also president of the Global Institute for Sustainable Prosperity, provided his dire findings on the 25th of May, Africa Day. Every Africa Day, Professor Kabub noted, we hear the same speeches about Africa rising. And every year, millions more young Africans enter economies that still export raw materials, import food and fuel, service external debt in foreign currencies, and remain trapped at the bottom of global value chain. Professor Kabub is attached to the Faculty of Economics at Denison University in the United States. He further noted that Africa is structurally disempowered, impoverished, and economically colonized. That distinction matters. The continent holds some of the world's largest reserves of green minerals, the youngest population on the planet, extraordinary renewable energy potential, vast agricultural capacity, and strategic geopolitical leverage in an increasingly fractured global order. Yet Africa continues to finance the prosperity of others while borrowing expensively in order to survive. That is not an accident of history. It is the colonial architecture of the global economy. The United States and Europe, their countries, almost all of them without faith, are frantic in every corner of Mother Africa as we speak. Their activities are often aggressive and threaten sovereignty of Africa's nation states, all 54 of them. Their primary goal is to extract and to take control of the continent's rare earth and other mineral resources. We see this in the Sahel region, where France has been kicked out by Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger in their collective quest for true independence. The reputational damage to France's humiliation is immense. The West uses many tricks to plunder Africa. To gain the foothold of African markets, the West uses their soft power. They fund and control NGOs and the media, which they use to manipulate public opinion, agenda setting, and the control of narratives. Every day, we wake up to mounting evidence of the scourge of unilateralism on world affairs. The Gaza genocide remains a matter likely to end up unpunished. The Trump administration holds a dim view of the International Criminal Court. Washington has issued threat of sanctions to any ICC official found to have acted in opposition to Washington's foreign policy interests. The collapse of the founding principles of the UN Charter bears testimony to the overall evaporation of our global governance systems. Israel is fearlessly destroying the geography of Lebanon as we speak, displacing millions while killing dozens of innocent people every day. In addition, President Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu's war of choice on Iran continues unabated. Throughout global conflicts, the UN is missing in action, thereby giving credence to the school of thought that maintains what remains of the UN is nothing but an empty shell of its former self. Kidnapping a president and his wife in the middle of the night, in their sleep, and illegally crossing borders with Venezuela's first couple and hold them before a dubious trial instead of an international court is behavior that reflects the law of the jungle. Also, to threaten other nations such as Greenland, Canada, Mexico, with annexation is an affront to civilized international norms and standards. To ignore the World Trade Organization and unleash a spate of indiscriminate barrage of tariffs reflects a behavior of madmen corrupted by absolute power. Professor Kabub appropriately reflects that at this juncture, the central question is no longer whether Africa can develop within the existing international and economic system that suffocates Africa. On marking 500 years of colonialism, the question should be whether Africa is finally ready to redesign the rules of the system itself. The African Union's Agenda 2063 calls for the Africa we want. Ideally, what is envisaged is an integrated, prosperous, sovereign continent capable of financing its own development and shaping global affairs. However, Professor Kabub and many others believe that this vision will remain rhetorical unless Africa confronts the deeper structures of dependency that continue to define its economic model. He argues that the problem is not simply corruption. No, neither the governance failures or lack of entrepreneurship, aka the favorite explanations of urban mainstream development discourse. The deeper problem is neo-colonial structural dependency. Most African economies remain trapped in colonial economic patterns in the following manner. They export raw commodities. They import manufactured goods. They depend on external financing. And they are all too happy to surrender their national policy space to creditors and international financial institutions. According to Professor Kabub, this is the heart of the death threat. Finally, my humble opinion is that in this era of enlightenment, Africa needs to stop her fragmentation and deal with the international community as a united front, demanding mutual respect and equality in thought, in word, and in deed. In that way, Africa's united voice would be too audible to ignore. United through the AU, Africa and the rest of the global south should demand that the Europeans that colonized the continent ought to pay reparations. And if they choose not to do so, Africa must blacklist such offenders. The International Schiller Institute would have achieved a great deal if they called for Europe to pay for reparation in their final list of resolutions or communique. I thank you.
Jetzt nach 2 Videos haben wir jemanden in Fleisch und Blut sozusagen.
Have somebody present here after 2 videos. Mr. Wolfgang Riess from Germany.
Der hat eine jahrzehntelang Erfahrung in führenden
has a decades-long experience in leading positions in the car industry, and also in research, and he wants to talk about the future of the automotive industry. And one asked oneself in a conference of the end of 500 years of colonialism, why a presentation about the automotive industry? And I would like to say that we are at the end of 500 years of colonialism, but are we also and at the beginning of colonization of the automotive industry? First of all, thank you that I'm invited to speak in front of the audience. I hope you can hear me well. It was really a provocative question. to begin by replying to this. First of all, I'm very happy to give my presentation here and to reply to this provocative question. Good, the question was what was in the context of the end of colonialism, how will the automotive industry look in the future? Until now, as we know, the big European and American producers had a power monopoly. But India is also coming with the Tata conglomerate. Now the question is, where do we go from here? And this is my report about this. The automotive industry does have a future, but it will not come automatically. It will industries with new concepts and with an openness that we have not used in Europe for a long time. The customer in Europe thinks different than the customer in China, and the American consumer and market has other priorities than India, South Africa, and Japan. They have their own accents. What does this mean? There won't be an automotive concept globally. The producers have to react quicker than in the past. Another trend is the increasing formation of alliances and mergers, the development of new powertrain technologies, fusions, new software platforms, autonomous systems is extremely capital intensive. No manufacturer can bear this burden alone. Collaborations between traditional manufacturers and suppliers are already emerging today. What is this discussion about? Not about the automotive industry, but the question is, what vehicle concepts will customer actually need in the future? And three areas are central to this. First, propulsion technology. Committing to a single technology would be a mistake. Whether internal combustion, electric drives, hydrogen, or other solutions we not yet know today, the future will be pluralistic. Different regions will favor different solutions, depending on infrastructure. The digital features, software is becoming a decisive competitive factor. Vehicles are increasingly becoming digital platforms that evolve through updates. Customers expect seamless integration of navigation, design, and user experience. Design will be determined less by styling and more by functionality. The vehicle will become a digital space that adapts to the user's needs, not the other way around. One area will profoundly transform the industry, that is autonomous driving. While there's intensive research testing in the US and China, Europe is proceeding with caution. The reasons are manifold: regulatory reluctance, higher safety requirements. The question is not whether we become autonomous driving systems, or the question is whether we develop them or import them. I am convinced that we need clear goals. And We need a concrete implementation to the development departments. Innovation does not arise from rigid guidelines, but from freedom. There will be developments that prove successful and others that fail. But it is precisely this process that is necessary. Impact on locations. The future of the automotive industry will be challenging. A further decline in employment is expected, especially in Europe, not in manufacturing, but also in development and sales. Global relocations will put pressure on traditional locations. The trend toward production in low-cost countries will continue. Mid-sized suppliers in Europe will be particularly affected. The industry's regional structure will change, and not all regions will emerge from this transformation unscathed. The automotive industry has a future, but it will look different from the past. It will be more diverse, more digital, more global. At the same time, the industry will be shaped by consolidation, relocations, and structural changes. The future of the automotive industry is not a straight path, but it is the uncertainty lies also in the opportunity, is also an opportunity for innovation, progress, new mobility concepts that are not yet known today. The mood that we are now seeing in the automotive industry is also a potential future. It brings know-how. I'm sure that also in Africa and in other countries outside of Europe, with the exception of the United States, qualified skilled labors exist that will master these challenges or are ready to accept these challenges. Thank you very much.
Also, danke, Herr Riess. Danke.
Thank you, Mr. Riess.
Wir haben schon wieder ein Video. Diesmal ist es Herr
Another video is
Jérôme
coming
Ravenet
up.
aus
Mr.
Frankreich.
Jérôme Ravenet from France, professor of philosophy and
ein Experte von China.
Sinology.
Can you please play the video, Mr. Ravenet?
Bonjour à Madame Helga Zepp-Larouche.
Hello,
Bonjour à
Madame Helga Zepp-Larouche, Mr. Chaminade, to all those who work for peace in the Institute Schiller and elsewhere. Let's recall that the historical record of the unipolar New World Order is not good at all. Not only has the triumphant end of history predicted by Francis Fukuyama didn't happen. After the Soviet Union, it is now the Anglo-American Empire that is collapsing. The prestige that the global West had acquired in the last 500 years of modernity has been progressively lost through the wars it has launched through colonial violence and ethno-supremacy, through the multifaceted enslavement of productive forces leading to the impoverishment of its own populations. In short, through an economic and military strategy of generalized chaos for the benefit of a globalized financial oligarchy. Under the guise of a rules-based order, the insane justice he attempted to legitimize and impose on the world ultimately appears for what it is, a paradigm power. That is, the conception of a world essentially seen as a set of coercive relations of force and domination summarized by the law of the strongest. The plundering of the small planetary garden has reduced it to a jungle. The dream of a global market, launched by Vasco da Gama, Magellan, and Columbus, the dream of techno-scientific mastery of the world formulated between Leonardo da Vinci and Descartes, and the dream of peace through which the signatories of the Treaties of Westphalia in 1648 or the international conferences of The Hague 1899-1907 had finally consented quickly turned into a nightmare and degenerated bitterly into generalized relations of exploitation and subjugation. But the objective factors of this domination have been exhausted, and another civilizational project has taken root in world history. The West now bases its old privileges on only 15% of the world's population. The rest claims 85%. Not only do the BRICS have a GDP that exceeds that of the G7, but they prove that growth is possible while reducing poverty. They prove, contrary to the predictions of the rivalry theories that have dominated the modern West, from Hobbes to Huntington, via Carl Schmitt, that a peaceful coexistence is a more effective, profitable, and sustainable principle of governance, much more sustainable than that of the friend-enemy relations or the clash of civilizations. For despite all the nonsense relayed in academic conferences and the official media, the BRICS and Xi Jinping in particular are prospering without seeking revenge. It is a matter of putting an end to the ideal of domination, not just to the hegemon itself. The goal is to move beyond a predatory mentality, not just the uncomfortable status of prey, but the propertied classes and their outpieces have clearly understood the risk that calls for a return to international law or free trade as a guarantee of peace and co-prosperity posed to their regressive thirst of hegemonic domination. The ultimate disillusionment: in the West, democracy is no longer an ideal, just an empty word. General de Gaulle sought to enshrine the will of the people in the principle of the referendum, Article 3 of the French Constitution, and during his decade in power, between 58 and 69, he organized 5 of the 10 referendums of the Fifth Republic. But since the no vote in the 2005 referendum on European integration, the EU's ruling classes no longer even bother to pretend. The risk of a dangerous populism is seen as sufficient justification for their disregard for the popular will and their seizure of power. The same is true of the international institution that emerged from World War II. Just one example. The governance of the IMF was intended to democratically reflect the relative economic weight of its members. But the EU holds 27% of the voting rights, compared to only 6% for China, even though their GDPs are equivalent. In domestic politics and international institutions, at every level, the Western legacy of democracy is in a state of cognitive dissonance, a pathological condition exacerbated by the exclusive privilege of freedom of expression, which the Western oligarchy supposedly has a moral duty to protect against the existential dangers of any alternative political model. Yet, it is precisely global democracy that the BRICS are talking about. They are demanding respect for, or even progress toward, democracy in the governance of international relations. By democracy, they do not mean the formal or representative procedures that ultimately defined liberal democracy in the West during the 19th century. Rather, for them, democracy designates the genuine exercise of a shared understanding of relations aimed at satisfying real needs. Against hegemonism, the coercion of power relations, against the logic of zero-sum games that define the paradigm of potency, the principle of a global democracy rests on relational co-intelligence, an equitable dialogue on the nature of reciprocal interest and the relevant strategies for their mutual satisfaction. Democracy is no longer defined by the agonistic features of a struggle for political power, as geopolitics has accustomed us to thinking of it. Rather, it subordinates the arbitration of relation to a philosophy of needs and partnerships that aims to satisfy them mutually. This democracy is the form in which the young Marx, who had read Spinoza, already saw the solved enigma of all constitutions. Without altruistic, nor egotistical, nor naively disinterested, nor brutally unilateral, it defines the paradigm of a combination of shared gains, adding the potency of each for the benefit of all. With reference to Spinoza, who conceived of a kind of knowledge that allows particular potency to be composed or integrated into the unity of a superior potency by means of common notions, this new paradigm can be called the paradigm of potency. It is an anti-antagonistic mathematical model of democracy which proposes to add up the forces against the hegemonism which was content to absolutize its own by identifying the common good with its particular interest. It is this new paradigm of potency, this ideal exercise in relational co-intelligence that the Chinese call community of a shared future of mankind. Community of a shared future for mankind, which has been heralding since 2012. Its strategic common notions are the win-win agreements that implement the Triple Global Initiative, March 15, 2023, Initiative for Development, Peace and Civilization in the mega projects such as the new strategic plans and the summit of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization or the International Organization for Mediation, IOMED, created in 2025. It is an ideal of co-prosperity for a truly multipolar world where unity is strength, which we know very well, the virtus unitatis superior of it stands in addition to the hegemonic ideal monopolization. Strategy is to antagonize and divide in order to better rule. Divide and rule.
Divide et impera, diviser pour mieux régner.
The alternative is tragic, but so simple. Humanity must choose either to unite or to oppose one another, or to add up its forces, or to exhaust them into mimetic rivalries, or to share, compose, multiply, or else to divide, oppose, and subtract. Power is sad, said another Spinozist. It wants to separate force from what it can do. Whereas potential desires joy and makes it radiate. Has the time finally come? Can the dream of a great renewal of civilization now be realized? With the old Atlanticist paradigm of unipolar world, dead or dying, is the Indo-Pacific the oasis of peace from which a new multipolar world order can be reborn? History will tell us and will answer. We have entered this decisive moment of transition in history, which commentators crudely summarize as the Thucydides trap or World War III. It offers as many reasons for concern as for hope. But to understand Chinese strategy, the famous game theory provides useful insights, as Xi Jinping indicates by repeatedly stating that China is not playing a zero-sum game. The academic Zhang Weiwei interpreted this to mean that despite a firm defensive military doctrine, China has no enemies. It has only potential friends. What is a potential friend? It's a partner who hasn't yet grasped the advantages of cooperative relationships or who still believes in the benefits of antagonism. The new Chinese rhetoric of game theory helps educate this type of imperfect friend about the risk of an unfavorable equilibrium that pits the winner against the losers, known as the Nash equilibrium. Every relationship contains contradictions, but wisdom lies in transforming them into complementarities, avoiding antagonism, and making the potential friend all the more effective or lasting by engaging in partnerships in which they themselves have a particular interest. Known as the Pareto optimum. Faced with the psychological maturity of this collective reason, transcending all ideological divides, the immaturity of Western leaders' warlike rhetoric is glaringly obvious and yards the ears daily. It manifests itself in emotional and contradictory judgments made against Russian, Chinese, Iranian, and other adversaries, whom our leaders present as both insignificant and dangerous. They denigrate them as weak, yet fear them as strong. But when an enemy is weak, what reason is there to demonize them and defend oneself against them? Conversely, if they resemble a genuine threat, isn't it wiser to avoid denigration? What intellectual confusion! This paranoid madness is the discriminatory symptom of the West's civilizational decline. The paradigm of power was based on relationships of distrust. Learning a reason capable of building a relationship of trust is therefore a counterintuitive and difficult path for a modern civilization and the teachings of Christ and philosophy and enshrine geopolitics as the ultimate science of political practice. Eh bien, c'est une leçon d'anti-géopolitique que la Chine... Nevertheless, China is undertaking to give the rest of the world a lesson of anti-geopolitics without relinquishing its interests nor asking anyone to relinquish theirs. It is creating platforms where they can engage in dialogue and envision unifying projects. But humanity is one, and the new multipolar world order, to which the non-aligned countries of the Banding Conference aspired, entered the final phase of its realization between 2008 and 2012 under the new banner of the BRICS. It has since been asserting itself, and its influence continues to grow, without yielding to the provocations of NATO and the Empire against the progress of the new Silk Road and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. I do not believe that the time for this new world order has come solely for the economic, political, and military reasons that geopolitics strives to measure. Although I am not a communist, I share the faith displayed by Xi Jinping, which inspires the architects of the new paradigm. The current crisis is an opportunity to realize within history the spiritual meaning of that universal wisdom to which, as Talère de Chardin believed, all that essence converges. The new paradigm is the omega point of that rendezvous with the universe that General de Gaulle so solemnly promised to China on January 31, 1964.
Et au monde, le 31 janvier 1964. En vous remerciant pour votre attention.
Thank you for your kind attention and wishing you an excellent conference.
So, merci, Monsieur Ravenet. And
Vielen Dank, Herr.
Thank you, Mr. Ravenet.
We now
We're now coming to our last speaker. That is Herr Mishra aus Indien.
From India.
Vergeben Sie mir, wenn ich Ihr Vornamen falsch ausspreche.
Okay, great. Unser Gast, unser Redner,
he is a journalist and columnist of the Times of India.
Thank you, gentlemen, excellencies, dear delegates. Thanks especially to the Schiller Institute International, and my special thanks to Helga Lorjou because she made me understand the value of the Bible verse, Matthew 20, chapter 20, verse 16, that says that the last shall be the first. And the first shall be the last, being the last speaker. So, and I am so impressed by all the inputs of Helga that, you know, it is very almost criminal to be pessimistic. We need to be active. So even though my topic is the effects of colonization and decolonization in the changing world order, my point of view is this, that the more India learns to decolonize, the better we will be in addressing the issues that we need in cooperating with the global South. And let me please present my small paper. So the history of colonialism in India is not merely a story of territorial occupation or economic exploitation. It is also a story of psychological conquest, the gradual reshaping of a civilization's self-image until millions began to doubt the worth of their own culture, language, knowledge system, and identity. The British did not simply colonize India's land and resources, they colonized the Indian mind. Even today, long after formal independence, the shadows of colonialism continues to shape the consciousness of Indian society. The deepest wounds of empire are often invisible. They survive in the way people think, speak, educate their children, and perceive themselves in relation to the West. Political freedom arrived in India in 1947. Psychological decolonization is still unfinished. Colonialism, or before colonial rule, India was one of the largest economic and cultural centers in the world. Indian mathematics, astronomy, linguistics, philosophy, architecture, medicine, etc. influenced civilizations across Asia and beyond. Sanskrit grammar remains one of the most sophisticated linguistic systems ever developed. In fact, European linguists themselves acknowledge the deep structural similarities between Sanskrit and many European languages, including German. The word for father and mother, pata, mutta, actually comes from Sanskrit. The word with in Danish that you know and you do not know comes from Sanskrit. And you know the very interesting thing, just 2 weeks back, the Icelandic Prime Minister, while addressing the Indo-Nordic Summit, she said that the word for relationship in Icelandic, Norwegian, and Swedish is sambond, sam and bonding together. And you know, the whole my life I have been using this word sambandh, means relationship. And she said this word actually came from India. So you can see that we have this globalization is not just new, we were in connection with each other long time back. Colonialism required not only military domination but cultural submission. A population that respects itself cannot easily be ruled by outsiders. Therefore, Indians were gradually conditioned to believe that their traditions were inferior, their languages inadequate, and their knowledge primitive. The British educational framework introduced by Thomas Macaulay sought explicitly to create a class of Indians who would be Indian in blood and color, but English in taste, in opinions, in morals, and intellect. Actually, just a year back, I met an Indian lady in Copenhagen who said to me that, you know, we were so colonized in our mindset that when we came to Denmark, we didn't even try to learn Danish because we thought all we needed was English. And now we are in a situation that those Indians who were not rich, they sent their children to Danish schools. And they are so happy, they are now grandfathers in Copenhagen, whereas our children, they migrated to USA, Australia, Canada. They left us because they were looking for opportunity in English countries. So you see, they have real consequences even today. Across India, English is often treated not merely as a language, but as a marker of intelligence, status, and modernity. Parents frequently feel ashamed if their children do not speak English fluently, while fluency in Indian languages is rarely given equal prestige. In elite spaces, Indians sometimes apologize for speaking their mother tongues. Now, this is one of colonialism's greatest victories, convincing a people to distance themselves from their own civilization. Thinkers such as Ashish Nandi, a famous psychologist in India, have argued that colonialism created a deep psychological fracture within colonized societies. So colonial power did not simply exploit bodies and labor, it altered the colonized self. The trauma manifests itself in many powerful ways. The preference of Western validation, the imitation of Western cultural norms, the belief that progress must always resemble Europe or America, and the discomfort many educated Indians feel towards their own traditions. Even among the Indian diaspora, these colonial patterns often persist. I am so fond of acting in India that I once sought being like the tall Indian. I'm tall for an Indian. And then I got a role, and then I earned some, maybe 2,000 euros. And then I thought maybe this is a good thing, maybe I should try it next time. And then I was asked, well, if I was a little more white, I could get another role. So you see, there is this whole thing about fascination of being more white. This reflects more the convenience. It reflects a psychological hierarchy created during the colonial rule. So you often have people in India when I go traveling and I ask them, why do you cover yourself all the time? We are naturally brown. No, we don't want to get more brown or darker. We want to stay as white as possible. Ironically, while some Indians continue to undervalue their own linguistic heritage, many foreigners show deep respect for Indian languages and culture. And I would like to really mention that I've met several Russians living in my own town, for example, who are learning Indian languages with admiration and intellectual curiosity. I have heard Russian citizens speak Hindi and other Indian languages with sincerity and respect. So sometimes this could be a helpful thing. This contrast reveals something important. Often outsiders value Indian civilization more confidently than Indians themselves. Now, what did colonialism do? Colonialism was not merely cultural domination, it was also the largest economic extractions in human history. For nearly 2 centuries, India's wealth was systematically transferred to Britain through taxation, trade manipulation, resource extraction, and the destruction of local industries. Researchers such as Utsa Patnaik estimates that Britain extracted the equivalent of approximately $45 trillion from India during the colonial rule. India was transformed from a prosperous manufacturing economy into a supplier of raw materials and captive market for British industrial goods. Traditional industries collapsed. Artisans were impoverished. Agriculture systems were distorted to serve imperial interest rather than local welfare. The consequences were catastrophic. Famines were instrumental. One of the darkest chapters of British rule was the repeated occurrence of devastating famines. These famines were not simply natural disasters, they were political disasters intensified by colonial economic policies. So during the Bengal famine in 1943, approximately 3 million people died. Yet food continued to be exported while millions were starving in India. Colonial authorities prioritized wartime logistics and imperial economic interest over Indian lives. Scholar Mike Davies demonstrated how colonial market ideology and converted regional crop failure into mass deaths. Grain exports continued even as entire population collapsed from hunger. The memory of these famines remains deeply embedded in the collective consciousness of India. I have met people who were very fond of Carl Gustav Jung and his idea of historical consciousness. And he was saying that many of the patients treated, they had this problem of eating too fast and eating too much. And probably the explanation was these experience of huge famines. Although formal empire ended, systems of domination did not appear. After the Second World War, new global structures emerged that preserved Western economic and geopolitical dominance through financial institutions, development paradigms, sanctions, and conditional aid that many of my friends from Africa actually mentioned today. Countries were now classified as developed and underdeveloped, and the position itself as a universal model for progress, Global South was treated as perpetually lacking something deficient and dependent. Now, this is the essence of neocolonialism. The modern international system often pressures developing countries to conform to economic models designed elsewhere, frequently benefiting multinational corporations, etc. Today, however, the world is changing. I mean, I want to definitely end on a positive note because Helga said that, pessimism is not the answer. So I agree here. Today, however, a new global order is gradually emerging, one in which Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the broader global South seek greater sovereignty and equal participation in shaping international systems. And I'm very thankful to all the speakers today who mentioned this, from Ethiopia to South Africa to all countries. We want to be recognized for our independent way, and we want to ourselves define how we should participate. In this context, and I will emphasize this very much, cooperation between India, China, and Russia becomes historically significant. There is no way out for us, I think, if India has to get out of everything. India, China, and Russia, they have to cooperate more. I'm not saying that Western world, but the global South, as Helga also said, that needs to get together. This fragmentation has to stop. Despite political differences and historical tensions, these civilizations, I think, share important common interest. All these three countries, for example, especially, they agree that resisting unilateral domination is important. They want to strengthen multipolarity, expand South-South cooperation, and create an alternative to these Western-controlled financial and geopolitical structures. So India's partnership with Russia in areas such as energy, trade, and defense reflects an important principle: cooperation without ideological subordination. Similarly, engagement between India and China, despite complexities, represents the possibility of civilizational cooperation between two of the world's oldest and largest societies. Finally, I want to say the future of the global South cannot be built through endless fragmentation. If Asia remains divided, external powers will continue to dominate global systems. But if major Eurasian civilizations cooperate pragmatically, they can reshape global economic and political structures towards greater balance and fairness. So decolonization must be psychological. We need to get out of it. True decolonization is not only political or economic, it's also psychological and cultural. In other words, valuing for example, the importance of our old languages. It means recovering confidence in one's own civilization without falling into chauvinism. We don't need to put our nation first. India was and still has this important verse which is often quoted everywhere in the world, Vasudev Kutumba, which means Vasudev means the whole world. Kutumba means family. The whole world is my family. This is one of the most central things that comes out from any Hindu scripture or the Vedic books or anywhere you read. I grew up with this thing. Regard the whole world as a family, exactly like what Helga said today. It means respecting also other languages than English. As I said, if I were the Prime Minister of India, I would say that we should learn German. And I personally have taken this on me that from today, when I go back to Denmark, luckily the language courses are free, so I am going to learn some German. Okay, and of course we should not imitate. It means recognizing that development can emerge from multiple civilization models. India does not need to reject the world in order to value itself. India does not need hostility towards the West. The goal is not reversal domination. We don't want to do what was done to us, but create the idea of equality among civilizations. Not the clash of civilizations as the whole theme of the conference emerges to me. Luckily, being the last, I'm able to see what is the red thread. The red thread is we want dialogue of civilizations. So I think on a positive note, I would like to end and say the 21st century now, where we are, presents the humanity with a historical opportunity. The old unipolar world is weakening, the new alliances are emerging, and the global south is increasing, demanding dignity, sovereignty, and equal participation in global governance. So India must liberate itself and maybe here understand that as equal partners, we should be participating more in the new global world. Thank you very much.
Stay here because we have the okay. Thank you. Dankeschön, Herr Mishra. Und jetzt machen wir
Thank you very much, Mr. Mishra. And now we make our discussion round.
Die Debatte und
The debate and discussion is opened now. I ask Mr. Sepp LaRouche, Mr. Onana, Mr. Mishra on the podium for our discussion. Und Herr Riess, natürlich. I knew that somebody was missing.
So, wir haben ungefähr eine Stunde. Wir müssen das.
So we have around 1 hour. We have to leave the hall at 5 p.m. And now I want to first ask the speakers if what they want to say, and then the audience. We begin in the order of the speakers with Mr. Onana.
Yeah, he speaks English. He does, yes. Okay, aber ich rede Deutsch und dann Sie kriegen eine Übersetzung.
I speak German and then you get a translation. He said he also can speak Italian. I have a relatively long question to Mr. Onana. You are coming from Cameroon. Is a member state of the organization, the group of the Lake Chad Basin Commission. Is a member of that. This organization wants to protect Lake Chad and revival of Lake Chad, and also wants to fight against terrorism like Boko Haram. In 2018, I was in Abuja at the famous international conference where all the member states have agreed to that the only solution to revive Lake Chad is a sweetwater lake where I think 30 million people are dependent. Their life is dependent directly from this lake, from this water source. And even Wikipedia has recognized that the LaRouche movement has led a leading role in promotion of Transaqua. That means bring water from the Congo Basin into Lake Chad. And this was really a breakthrough back then, because all countries have agreed to, even Italy, because of the migration problem. And Italy has promised to give a donation, initial donation, to finance the feasibility study. But after that, nothing happened. The government in Italy fell. Also, nothing happened in Africa. And my impression is that their European powers, maybe even USA, have mobilized to block that. I want to tell one episode. Suddenly, in Wiesbaden, we were visited by a colonel from the Africa Command in Germany. He wanted to know what is happening there. And I can only explain that to myself that the European countries have put pressure against it. So I would like to hear your opinion about that.
Écoutez, alors, je n'ai pas la connaissance profonde de ce dossier. Par ailleurs,
I don't have a full knowledge of this dossier. I have knowledge of the fight against terrorism, against Boko Haram in that region, because I wrote a book on this issue. I recognized that, in effect, the issue of the lake, of the basin of Lake Chad, is a real issue for all these countries: Cameroon, Chad, Niger, and Nigeria. And I saw if these countries would try to work in common agreement on the issue of the development of this entire region, because around this region, because right now poverty has exploded around the lake, and there has been an abandonment of these areas. This abandonment by the states of the regalian, the state structures, this has created insecurity, and this insecurity has created an unbalance in this environment and the populations. And part of the populations of this area had to go in exile to escape from violent action. I was very happy to listen to Helga speak about development, because that was one of my conclusions in my book on this, on the Lake Chad area. So this project, which I discovered recently, I think it is a project which has to be put on the table again, because it is clear, evident, that after the US intervention and the retreat of the EU and France on the G5 of Sahel, which is the coordinating agency to fight terrorism, it is clear now that France and the EU, they are not really willing to stimulate development in this region. Instead of waiting to have new relations with France and the EU and so on and so on, I think it is the responsibility now of the local governments to take this into their own hands for their own economic survival, this project, and to put it on the table to reintegrate Niger into the political relations of the region, also for economic reasons. We cannot have a regional stability by excluding Niger. We can do without Niger, and it would be absurd to do it. So it's the right moment to re-put this project. I can help as far as I can to give it to the right people to promote this project. Thank you a lot. Mr. Riess, you're the next
Thank you very much. Mr. Riess, you have already said something about that, but I don't know if you know that the Schiller Institute, which has is now preparing writing a report, which is work in progress, where we think about how we can have a cooperation between the industry in Europe, inclusive of the automobile industry, and China and Africa together. We bring that together? And how can we Europeans cooperate with China for the development of Africa? And there we have thought, can we do with the auto industry? It's in a crisis. Should we try to produce automobile more there and produce more and more automobiles? How can you see the possibility how we can do something with China in Africa, maybe tractors instead of automobiles? Tractors instead of tanks, of course. What? Tanks we don't want to talk about. They don't fit in this current time anymore. Also in Europe, the thing, although Europe thinks a lot in terms of tanks, respectively the Ukraine conflict and so on, but what I think about the automobile industry, I already talked about that China, some decades ago, Chinese students have studied the European technology. And that led to that China said, we also go into the automobile industry. cannot forget that in the VW enterprise they have outsourced production into China. What I also talked about already, India, the Tata industry enterprise, where I have worked for, they have worked on systems in the inside of a car, different parts. There is a lot of interchange with the Tata enterprise. So many years ago, a joint venture began with this enterprise. In Pune, I think, in India, something also on this respect was built up. African students, be they in Africa, Germany, or in other European nations, the knowledge that they got, they have brought, of course, to Africa. Therefore, all this, what I already talked about, I want to call it a regionalization. That means that in these continents, it is possible to search the way which is, we have to find what the consumer wants and needs. We cannot just bring our technology. We need, therefore, an interchange with those countries. In our European industry, automobile industry is now not ahead anymore, but has fallen back. South Africa and France, they have to stop being arrogant and say that these countries have a certain know-how. Why should we not learn from these countries? We need an interchange worldwide. But the thought of colonialism, we have to give that up, the Europeans. Mr. Mishra, the topic fragmentation of the BRICS and the Global South, you and other speakers have spoken about that. And the positive is that India and China have taken steps in direction of understanding each other. When China and India would be able to do that, then the whole world can do that. But we don't know here what actually is happening there. So can you maybe tell us, in your opinion, what are the problems that are from the viewpoint of India or in India, in your opinion, which problems needs to be solved right now in order to improve the cooperation with China? The same question goes here. Through the media propaganda, we have a certain picture of China, which is totally wrong. Here, we describe China as a land that wants to dominate the world and conquer. Is something similar happening in India, or what is going on?
Thank you for your question. Can everyone hear me? Yes, good. Let me start by stealing some of his questions. When I was in India, they said that for the Indian roads, in order to avoid traffic accidents, we are actually champions in traffic accidents. So in order to really avoid that, you have to drive in a German car. So there is a good potential for German cars in India. This was a taxi driver who told me in India in one of my trips. But anyway, coming to your question, the trouble is this, that as I said, that since India has been colonized by the English world, so just during the Biden administration, there were so many trips, especially by their foreign minister Blinken, who came, for example, trying all the time that you better put the brakes on BRICS. Don't join, don't participate, don't join the financial, currency, whatever. Do something else, let us know what's going on. So the thing is that the Anglo-American world, if you can say, the British and the American, have been blackmailing India for a very long time. And even with this lucrative and advantageous cooperation with Russia, it was made possible by Trump to say that, well, we are going to put the tariffs so high, so you better stop buying. And then we have this Iran crisis, and India had to immediately go back with a loss of $1.5 billion every month. So, of course, the Russia said, well, you pay the market price now. So the thing is this, that India has paid somewhat the price of not making this decision. And what maybe other countries can help is that India should realize that there is a very big potential benefit in having this South-South cooperation, accepting this cooperation with China, as you said. So the point is this, that there are so many Indians who live in USA, and they are in the tech industry, you see. So, and America has comparatively a very big influence in India, which results in this, that pressure, you can say, and that's why India has been, dragging their feet and not realizing this potential of cooperation. And what is worse is, I think, that at some points they were willing to join some other organizations like Quad and etc., would make things worse. So let us hope that India will be more positive toward BRICS. Thank you.
Dankeschön. Helga, bist
Thank
du
you.
zufrieden
Helga,
mit der Diskussion heute?
are you satisfied with today's discussion, including what we've just now discussed? Do you have any comments on that? Of course, I'm very happy about the conference, except for the last moderator.
Hat mir eine Steilvorlage gegeben, die konnte ich nicht.
Yes, given me
Nein, ich denke, dass es
opportunity.
zeigt,
It really shows what we're doing here, that this is extremely important, and that you learn from one another. What you have taught us that is not in our media, but it is very important. Talking about the end of colonialism, but colonialism is continuing. If you ask Europeans, do you support colonialism? They said, no, no, no. But then should the IMF be changed so that countries of the developing sector can get better credits? And then they say, no, 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 no. No. So in words, people would reject colonialism. Also, many people reject racism. But if you look at the praxis, then you see that colonialism and racism are still very much alive. And that has, like what you, Mr. Mishra said about the colonial mentality in India, that the dominance of, cultural dominance of the Anglo-Americans. When I came to India, I immediately recognize this. So the British ideology, small is beautiful, is very dominant. But everything that you said about Indian, I can just put in German or Germany, and it fits, because we also have this mental situation. So the opportunity, the advantage of such conferences is that you see things and you get more conscious about things. These so I personally, it's correct what Mr. Alaki said about the UN, and the Chinese had a large event in New York about the UN, that it needs not to be done away with, but to and it needs reforms, which is all right. But what you need to really change is the mentality. And an example for what I mean is the switch from the 14th century to the 15th century in Europe. If you look at that, the 14th century was a dark age. The pestilence killed 1/3 of the people between India and the Atlantic. There was superstition, witch persecution, witches were born. They had theological debates about how many angels fit on a needles. The Peripatetics have taught Aristotelianism. So it was a dark age. And then there was the 15th century, where the Italian Golden Renaissance started. An incredible cultural high point. The importance of urban life was massively increased. So what was the reason? What was the cause for this change? It was the influence of people like Dante, Petrarca. It was this going back to the antique sources, like in Latin. It was Nicolaus von Kues going to Byzance, bringing the Byzantine representatives to the Council of Florence, where he worked out that in the early councils there was the idea of the filioque, which unites the Greek Catholic churches, and the Greek delegate brought the whole Plato to Central Europe, which had been totally forgotten. So Nicolaus von Kues developed the idea of the coincidence of opposites, a new method of thinking. All this came together to create a golden age of civilization of Europe. And this has, for 600 years, consequences. It's a huge step from the 14th to the 15th century. A change of. So just meant this to illustrate what kind of a paradigm shift we need to get out of this colonial mentality, just as the 15th century left the 14th century behind. And if we're going for a future, the one humanity and the solution of the futures, it's like we need to develop nuclear fusion power, because only then we have energy safety. We need to develop space flight, because we can go beyond many limits. Also in thinking, all the astronauts who were up there come to back, they say the the Earth is just a planet, and we know that there are at least 2 trillion galaxies in the world, and probably in everyone there's a civilization. So just this, think about it. It's beyond everything you can think about, but then you realize that in a few billion years, Earth is not cannot be inhabited anymore because of the development of the sun. But by then, if we now needs to be done, then we can bring our civilization and preserve our civilizations beyond Earth. So make this mental. We have to not look at people as Africans, Germans, Liechtensteiners, even smaller units. We should now discuss where should humanity be 100 years from now, 1,000 years from now, so that we survive together. And that's a change of mentality, where we stop regarding each other as geopolitical enemies. Perhaps in the cultural program, what I found really refreshing is that you can experience other cultures and experience their beauty. And this component of the dialogue of civilization is, as far as I think, we cannot do it. So to create the idea of the one humanity. So conferences like this are a very important aspect of this, that we meet personally, that we have this exchange and dialogue, because only in that way we will be able to succeed. Of course, I would be happy if there were more people here in the room, but nevertheless, the usefulness of such conferences is enormous. So it's positive that there are still many people here in the room and nobody is asleep. So we have still some time for the discussion, and so we open the floor for the audience, for questions from the audience, especially from the young friends from Africa. I know.
Please don't be shy. So, wer? Aber ich sehe keine Hände. Die Dame hier, der Herr da.
So.
Young people there, no questions? Okay, I think, oh, there it is.
There's somebody.
Une question à l'adresse de Onana.
Got a question for Onana. Which mining policy do you think the African countries should apply? Mr. Onana, which mining policy do you think that the African country should adopt?
I am Sanjay from India. Let me Thank you. Mrutjuanjai is the name, and Mrutjuanjai means the one who has conquered the death. I wish you the same. The speaker who spoke is Mrutjuanjai. Anyway, he spoke about the colonialism. One field I want to touch upon, which was not possible for him to collect each and every point in his speech. The darker truth about the colonialism was, in our case, it was the Britishers. They tried to obliterate our history and the past. If you take away somebody's name and his history from him or her, the person becomes as good as an animal. Why I'm saying so? In 1835, Lord Macaulay, he went to India, and after visiting India, India's education system was based on Gurukul system, what we today know as the boarding houses. In India, the children, after attaining the age of 7 or 8, was sent to a boarding house run by a rishis, where he used to stay for a couple of years, get properly educated, and come back and then contribute to the society, and then get married. So once after going back to his parliament, he had projected a system after studying the Indian system, and I'm just summing up what he wrote, and it is there on record. It's very dreading, it is very scary. He wrote, "We must at present do our best to form a class who may be interpreters between us and the millions whom we govern. A class of persons, Indian in blood and color, but English in taste, in opinions, in morals, and in intellect." How dreadful. And believe you me, thereafter, it was ratified by this entire thing was ratified by the parliament. It was implemented by the subsequent so-called lordships who came as viceroy in India. And it was there for almost more than 100 years. In those 100 years, they tried their best to obliterate our history, our education system, and our rich culture, including the various monuments. They were all just left aside and they were buried under the earth. We are still excavating. They are to be seen. If you come to India, please see Ajanta and Ellora. They have been made top to bottom. Even if 1 degree you go haywire, the system collapses. The India was so rich. Why I'm saying so when everybody is speaking about their country, why not? People should know. And what Britishers did before leaving, they ensured the kind of government is there should comprise of people who are educated in UK, in England. So they told their line. And India had no reason but to do it. Now we have come a long way. Imagine. We are trying to find out roots, our cause, and you will be surprised. There have been dynasties in India, dynasties of good kings who have contributed positively. They have not been invaders who were powerful, could have gone to other countries to invade. But no, they stayed within the Indian peninsula, that continent. And they have ruled for more than 300, 400, 500 years, the amount of year which is not even as old as the US is today, much older than that. So what I'm trying to convey is that colonialism was actually very bad, and a lot of other countries have suffered today. I would submit for them, they should also go back and find their roots, their cultures. Today, the present government in India, people can say so, is doing excellent. We are finding our roots, our culture, and the education system. Imagine the entire history which was being taught in schools post-independence were not carrying the name of those kings, cultures, and good people. We were being taught everything about Western countries. It's good. Why not? This will go. But before reading about others, I should know about myself. If today I don't discover myself, how would I discover yourself? That's the one thing. Now coming back about India, China, good news is BRICS payment system is in place. The basic module has worked, and in the year 2026, more than $1 trillion of trade has taken place in BRICS payment system. BRIC is going to come up, hopefully, God willing, because the world will move if there are proper balancing systems. And at the last but not least, like in India, a child is taught by his mother that if any branch which is laden with the fruit always bows down. If you are high and mighty, if you are full of knowledge, you should bow down. You should not be stiff and arrogant. It is only after your death people, the country, who they are strong, they should become very malleable. They should bow down. They should listen to others. And
Verzeihen Sie, ich hoffe, ich darf schreiben, weil ich ein bisschen nie Beschwerden haben. Weichten keine Fragen vermitteln an alle und eine besonders an die Afrikaner, die hier sind. Die erste, dass
I want to talk about two things. I want to congratulate the Americans for a few weeks to protest on the street against the practically monotheistic idea that Trump is proposing and with which he's trying to get hegemony all over the world. So that USA, that Americans are also in effect protesting against Israel. That shows me that the Americans are shortly before a total change in the politics, and that makes me very optimistic. And that's much better than what we in Europe can do. And the second is Burkina Faso, namely the young revolutionary and new president who has been elected he came to power in a coup 2022 in Burkina Faso, namely Ibrahim Traoré, that Burkina Faso could free itself from colonialism and through that was in danger in a matter of 2 months. 19 times he was threatened by death. He has achieved a lot for his country. His first achievement was that the resources of Burkina Faso are being used for Burkina Faso and the development. And it's very visible what he's doing here. He has a good relationship with China, but he doesn't want a new dependency. So that means because he wants to be treated on eye level, and he also has reached out to South Africa. He has proposed that we make bridge between Saudi Arabia and the Arabic countries. The government in Saudi Arabia was surprised positively that somebody has offered something, and that was important for Mr. Traoré. So this might have worked now, which is wonderful. I want to congratulate to that. There's a alliance to other neighboring countries who are effective in fighting against terrorism and therefore the colonialism, to get that out. And now to the last question.
The last speaker mentioned about the psychology of colonialism. So, looking at the colonized countries, can we say what is depriving their economic growth? Is it the mentality of colonialism is still prevailing, or is because of the impact that was left with colonialism? Still on that, if let's say the biggest contributor that can be depriving the economic growth of the colonized countries is the mental colonialism, would it be a great idea to stop transferring the history of colonialism to the next generation with the aim of abolishing or avoiding the transferring of the mental of colonialism to the next generation? Thank you.
Ich glaube, die erste Frage war an Onana. Ja?
First question was to Mr. Onana.
Yes.
Ja, ich glaube,
I think that about the question of the mining policy of the African states, I think that the African states until now were contracts with a multinational company. That it means that all the thinking about the mining resources was not a sovereignist thinking. They had not a vision of sovereignty. They wanted to have a partnership, but in fact they had predators in front of them, which were proposing contracts, very bad contracts, which were funded on exploitations, massive exploitation of the strategic resources of their country. And in this logic, this is a big lawyer cabinets which were preparing the contracts for the African states because there was a problem, an expertise problem between the big mining company which were signing with African countries, and this was contracts in English, in the English language. And today, the African countries are confronting to the reality that they have to have lawyers which have to be formed, which have to be very qualified. They have to be experts, very qualified experts of African countries, to be able not to sign contracts on 40 years or 25 some. The people in South Africa or the Anglo-American companies were signing company on 95 years. It means that all generations of leaders could die, but the contract is still there. And when we know that on the international level, you have costs of some mining products, they can take a value. For example, cotton today, because of the hotel industry, of the electric today, you cannot sell this to a low price. It's not good to sell it to a low price. It's not good for the African countries. So all the money is going, and also without taxes. These companies are not paying taxes on the African countries, and they have big benefits. So to go out of this situation, the African countries should take back sovereignty policy on the mining questions.
Okay. Bevor Sie antworten, würde ich gerne eine Frage von Herrn
Mr. Mishra, before you answer, I want to ask a question from Mr. Nielsen because he has to leave.
Yeah, okay. My name is Jens Nielsen. Thank you very much for very inspiring, interesting performances here. And I have a question because it relates to what you said, Mishra, and also to what you said, because you said something very interesting about that Indians have some homework to do in order, to overcome, this cultural, psychological inheritance from colonialism. And I also think that we in the West, we have some homework to do in this country. Because we have the last 500 years, you talked about it, Helga, very interesting. We have been used to that we are, up here, and all other cultures are down here somehow. I think it goes very deep at many people. I think it's a way of thinking which is probably quite difficult for many people in the West, to be aware of and also to overcome. So how to step down from this situation, because also you said a lot about Renaissance and philosophy of enlightenment. I agree with everything you said, of course. But on the other hand, we should be aware that very often we weaponize ideas of Renaissance, we weaponize ideas of enlightenment, as if we are the only ones on the planet who come to those ideas, which is definitely not true also. So I think this is something we have to here in our part of the world, we have to deal with one way or another. And if you go and talk to politicians, you would hear the same thing: oh, we have Renaissance, we have philosophy of enlightenment, and we are so bright, and we are morally good, and things like that. The second thing I will also mention in this connection, it's somehow related. It is that many politicians, they think of those questions here as a zero-sum game. So our loss is the other win. Others' win is our loss. So if Africa develops, it means that we will be underdeveloped. There's a competition. And I also think that the French philosopher mentioned a little about this also. So how to get away from this zero-sum game, think that we have to be strong in order to keep the others down. I think it's an old-fashioned way of thinking. I think for European politicians, I think it's a very dangerous way of thinking in this zero-sum game patterns. So it's more like I would like to have some remarks from you on those thoughts and perspectives which I showed here. Thank you.
Before our speakers answer the two questions, Deutsch.
Please look at the book tables out there. We have the newspaper, we have the Fusion, we have Ibicus, and think of that. And think in terms of to deepen what we have discussed today. These are really good tools. And if you want to donate, that would be very much appreciated. Helga, would you first answer? I first want to answer to Mr. Jensen before he leaves. We should not throw out the baby with the water. There's a big difference between the Renaissance and the Enlightenment. We have, when we talk about Renaissance, then we mean those peoples who already have this progressive standpoint of one humanity, like Confucius, Plato, Leibniz, Schiller, Beethoven. With other words, these are those people in world history who didn't have those problems. That's what we mean with Renaissance. We don't mean this period. With the classic also, we don't mean we don't mean the difference between classic and romantic. That's a wrong idea. But we mean to bring together all those people over the centuries who have contributed to progress of humanity, and it doesn't matter where they come from. Confucius and Plato and Leibniz, they all belong to that. That's what I wanted to clarify. So it would be really sad if we would throw out everything just because it's European.
Okay, I hope my microphone works, and Jens-Jan, thank you for asking the question, and I will connect it to the very good question up there as well. I will put it this way, that for a person in a personal life, if you go through a very traumatic relationship, your wife ditches you or something horrible happens, you miss somebody in your life that dies, these are traumas that you have to work with. I am a believer in that. And in the same manner, I think African nations and India, they are traumatized nations in my view. I have lived there. I speak 5 Indian languages. I know the trauma. And in that sense, Yanshan, it has been a big dilemma for me to understand that when Russia comes to India's help, India would have ended in the same situation like what happened to Serbia. We would have been balkanized, as they say, if it was not for Russia. So much is, I don't want to get into the history, but so much was the attempt from both Kissinger and God knows his plan, etc. But Russia helped. And even then, India is wobbling because of this colonization, you know, so much of that mindset. So I completely agree that we are colonized to that extent that we are not even able to see who our true friends are. And this is now coming about in that sense, I think, that people are realizing, and it is not the governments, it is the people of India who said that who helped us when we really needed help. So that is one of the things. But I think the traumas are real in the sense that we are producing things for a very long time for countries and not producing things for ourselves. And I think we need to think a little bit also in the self-interest. But somehow this process of healing has to come about. And instead of, like as I said in my speech, that we don't need the opposite of it, that get angry or whatever, but heal ourselves, reconnect with the world, and believe in those things like regarding humanity as one family. And I mean, I simply do not understand that why we are not learning more Russian, just like you are an expert on Russian language. Why aren't we learning more German, or why were we so fixated only on English, for example? So these are the things that I hope in future India will bring changes about and see the world as one humanity and discover their own roots. This is my small, short answer. Thank you.
Oui, cette observation sur le fait que quand
I want to say that people think that when a Western country win, the other lose. It's a principle that animated the relations between the Western countries and the rest of the world during a long time. And Africa was at the center of this of this. And it was always funny for me to see always a comparison between France and Germany on this notion. You see, for example, that Germany had some colonies in Africa, but which were from the more poor, Rwanda, a little bit Namibia, a little bit Togo, but these were not rich colony in terms of resources. But France had the countries like Niger, Mali, Ivory Coast. You take Gabon, you take Congo. It's the most rich in terms of mining. And I asked to the French friends, how is it that you are the second economy after Germany in Europe with this after the Second World War? I think that a lot did not understood that, for example, for the automobile industry, France had during the 60s and 70s had the Algerians, the Senegalese, the Tunisians, people from Morocco, which worked at Renault, Peugeot for many years. So this is specialized workers. So they have an expertise in this domain. At no moment, France thought that the automobile industry would be in a competition with Asia, and that France had to anticipate, like making industries, its industries in other countries, like Germany made its industries in Asia, but France had at no time the ideas to make industries of Renault and Peugeot in Africa. that these countries could then develop a middle class quite important, and then could consume French cars, and that this could be a very important market for France. And this will also enable to French engineers, which could not work in France, to go and work in Africa. So this idea of partnership disappears from the conceptions of the leaders. So when you see in Africa, you see Toyota, you see Nissan, and people doesn't want to hear not about Peugeot or Renault. So I think you have lived this kind of experiment.
Ich möchte hier nur eins einflechten, und zwar einmal das, aber ich möchte auch einflechten, dass viele deutsche Zulieferer in der Zwischenzeit Nordafrika.
I would also mention that many automotive companies, for example, ZF Friedrichshafen, part of their production were transferred to Morocco, and that also other logistics companies were drawn into that country. We now have the opportunity for two fortunates who can ask a question before we hear a remark from Helga. Two questions are permitted. The young person over here.
Hello, Mr. Onana.
Hi,
so recently there
Mr.
was this UN resolution on the transatlantic slave trade, and so many countries either abstained or voted against it. So now people are talking about reparations as well, or compensation for the slave trade and colonialism. But there are so many things to consider. So Europeans, or some Europeans, will say some of these things were done by our ancestors, and some of us are not responsible. So how do they expect us to pay reparations or compensate when this thing ended decades for slavery hundreds of years ago, or colonialism decades ago? So how are we responsible? And also, in the sense of how can this reparation be done in a way that all those that were affected are well compensated, or the generations that have been affected, and also psychologically as well, because that's something difficult to, how do you compensate or reparate for something that's psychological? So it's something for both Mr. Marshall and Mr. Onana for us to discuss. How can this reparation be done in a way that is beneficial for all those that were affected, whether it's in a country level or tribal level, as most Africans then we are mostly in tribes rather than countries as we know them now?
Ma question s'adresse aussi à Monsieur Onana.
I've got a question also for Mr. Onana. I like what you are doing here. We speak about things which are from nowadays, and we are speaking about how to make peace prosper, grow in the world. What can we do also in our level? We think about this, and I like because it makes us possible to have a vision, to have a clear thinking, a clear vision of what we want to do. So, as I am from Cameroon, and for me, how do you think I can act as an expert, and also as a peace activist, knowing the context of the Cameroon and also of Africa? Thanks.
Ich habe mich eigentlich mit der Zeit verschätzt. Wir haben jetzt nur Zeit für eine
We only have time for very short final statements from Helga, maybe with a short remarks.
Alors, sur la question des réparations,
about the question of reparations, I think it's a quite simple question. If we consider with the law, which the transatlantic slavery was a crime against humanity. It's imprescriptible crimes. So we should have reparation. And which way can we do that? So it's African countries should formulate very clear propositions with their cooperations with the countries which are supposed to have been active in these crimes, so that there can be compensations in terms of work, in terms of cooperation. And at the Schiller Institute, they are proposing development questions. You can have a reparation in terms of development projects, which can be good for all the countries, all the people of the country. And about the person which is activist for peace, I think that it's quite simple. Also, you just have to work actually, but very hard. In Germany, we work very hard. So if you work very hard as an expert on this question, there is no reason that people will not consider your point of view. But there is a trick that there is 250 ethnies in Cameroon. In Cameroon. So the problem is that when you ask as a national person of Cameroon, people want to know from which ethnic you are from, and we have a hard time to say, yeah, but we are a patriot. I am a patriot of the country, not only representative of an ethnic, of a group of the country, but of the whole country. It's important also the different groups, but we have to see that when the country is in danger, the groups, the ethnic questions are not the most important questions. It's the national question, because these also groups, ethnic groups, can be used by external agents to destabilize the country.
Ja, also ich habe jetzt die Ehre, die letzten 3 Minuten.
I have the honor to use the last remaining 3 minutes to make a final statement. I just want to reply to the lady in the first row who unfortunately had to leave and talked about the large demonstration in the United States against the monarchy. That's true on the one hand, but where were these people when Charles, Prince or King Charles, spoke in both chambers of Congress in the United States and basically relativized the American Revolution by saying that the American Revolution and the British system were on the same page, and it was an attempt to bring the American Revolution on the side of the British Empire. And I would like that you cannot let this stand uncommented. If we want to fight this war and win this war, we would have to develop a very high intellectual standard. And I would like to invite you to become a member of the Schiller Institute, because this is really maybe the most important venue where the resistance against empire, the idea of a unipolar world, is to bring together a movement of world citizens who, first of all, take care of one humanity and then discuss their national problems. I think that we have gone very far, reached very far yesterday and today. I'm very, very happy about what we did yesterday to see this the variety of ideas that we discussed. And you should go home and intervene into mankind to make sure that this period of transition is where we can safely reach a new paradigm and develop in your heart and cultivate in your heart a great love for mankind, because you can do that very consciously It can only be that we overcome hatred and resentments and negative feelings only through love for mankind. And from that, you can draw the power and the strength to overcome all hurdles and challenges that we have. Go home and multiply.